The roar of heavy machinery shattered the quiet morning as a massive bulldozer crashed through the final standing wall. Splintered wood, shattered glass, crushed furniture. What was once a home had been reduced to nothing but debris and dust. The air was thick with the scent of destruction. A black SUV pulled up, its tires crunching over the wreckage. The door swung open, and a man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his crisp government-issued suit stained slightly with travel dust. Daniel Carter removed his sunglasses, revealing cold, piercing eyes that locked onto the ruins of what had been his house. The wrong house. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists. He said nothing. He simply stared at the destruction before him, letting the reality settle. They had no idea who they had just crossed. The HOA had made their move. Now, it was his turn. Daniel Carter had been looking forward to his first weekend off in months, a rare moment of peace in his high-pressure job. His latest assignment had taken him across the country, and all he wanted was to return home, enjoy a quiet evening, and sleep in his own bed. Instead, he found nothing. His home, his personal belongings, even his classified work documents. Gone. There had been no emergency notices, no warnings, no eviction orders. And yet, his house had been demolished as if it had never existed. Daniel didn't panic. He didn't shout. He didn't demand explanations from the stunned construction workers still standing around, unsure of what to do next. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a call. The Oak Ridge HOA had just started a war they couldn't win. Across town, in a pristine air-conditioned office lined with awards and certificates, Gerald Whitman, the president of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association, leaned back in his chair with a smug grin. The tap-tap of his golf club against the carpet echoed in the room as he basked in his latest victory. Another house is gone. Another blight was removed from his neighborhood. Finally, he muttered, sipping from his overpriced espresso. That eyesore is history. A knock at the door interrupted his moment of triumph. His secretary, Linda, peeked in, her face uncertain. Mr. Whitman, there's a man here to see you. Gerald waved a dismissive hand. Tell them to take it up with the appeals board. If they didn't follow the regulations, that's their problem, not mine. Linda hesitated. Sir, I think you should see him. Before Gerald could respond, the door swung open. Daniel Carter stepped inside. Sunglasses off. Eyes like steel. His voice was calm. Eerily calm. I want an explanation. Now. Gerald barely glanced up, unimpressed. And you are? Daniel Carter. His voice was ice. The actual owner of the house your people just bulldozed. Gerald's smirk barely faltered. I think you're mistaken. The house that was demolished today was abandoned and in violation of multiple HOA regulations. Daniel reached into his inner coat pocket, pulled out a neatly folded document, and placed it on the desk with deliberate force. Gerald's smirk faded as he unfolded it. The title deed. Daniel Carter's name is clear as day. The house had been legally owned. Taxes paid. No outstanding violations. The color drained from Gerald's face for only a second before he quickly regained composure. Well, mistakes happen, he said, waving his hand dismissively. The demolition order must have been an oversight. I'm sure we can come to some sort of agreement. Daniel's expression didn't change. An agreement? My home is gone. Everything in it is gone. I don't think oops quite covers that. Gerald leaned back, exuding false confidence. Look, Carter, these things happen. The HOA had the legal right to demolish properties in violation of community standards. If you feel there's been a mistake, you're welcome to file a complaint. He chuckled. Good luck with that. Daniel studied him for a moment before leaning in slightly. You have no idea who you just messed with. Gerald smirked. Oh, I think I do. You're just another homeowner who thinks he's special. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood there for a moment as if deciding something. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the office. Gerald chuckled under his breath. Another arrogant homeowner who thought he could fight his HOA. He had no idea that Daniel Carter wasn't just a homeowner. He was a federal agent. And this wasn't over. Miles away, in a sleek government office, Daniel Carter sat in silence. His fingers drummed against the desk as he listened to his attorney, Sarah Hayes, explain his options. They've really screwed up, Daniel, she said, flipping through the HOA bylaws. Not only was the demolition illegal, but the way they went about it, it's practically begging for a lawsuit. Daniel's expression was unreadable. And that's just the legal side of things, he said, his voice low and measured. They also destroyed highly classified federal case files. Sarah looked up sharply. Wait, what? My home office contains sensitive documents related to ongoing federal investigations. Sarah paled. You realize what this means, right? That's not just a civil case anymore. That's a federal security breach. Daniel nodded. Which means the HOA didn't just bulldoze the wrong house. He stood, adjusting his tie. They bulldozed their way into a federal nightmare. The first domino had fallen. Daniel Carter wasn't just any federal agent. He specialized in high-stakes investigations involving corruption, fraud, and abuse of power. And right now, the Oak Ridge HOA had unknowingly walked into his crosshairs. As he exited the attorney's office, Daniel made his next call. Caleb, it's Carter. I need everything from the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. Financial records, legal disputes, internal memos, the works. Caleb, a data analyst with a knack for digging up secrets, let out a low whistle. Sounds like someone stepped on the wrong toes. You got a warrant? Not yet, Daniel replied. But I have probable cause. Their demolition order was fraudulent, and they may have violated federal security protocols. Say no more, Caleb said. Give me 24 hours. Daniel ended the call and turned toward the HOA office. It was time for round 2 with Gerald Whitman. When Daniel walked back into the Oak Ridge HOA office, he wasn't alone. 2 uniformed local police officers flanked him. Behind him, Sarah Hayes, his attorney, carried a folder filled with legal paperwork. Gerald looked up from his desk, clearly caught off guard. Mr. Carter, he greeted, his tone forced. I thought we'd settled this earlier. Daniel stepped forward, placing a sealed legal notice on Gerald's desk. You're being served. This is a formal lawsuit for property destruction, trespassing, and violation of federal regulations. Gerald's smirk faltered. Now wait just a minute. The officers here, Daniel gestured to the police, are investigating whether criminal charges apply. Specifically, conspiracy to commit fraud and willful destruction of government property. The color drained from Gerald's face. Daniel leaned in slightly, his voice low and cold. You destroyed classified documents. That makes this a federal case now. Gerald swallowed hard, but before he could respond, his secretary, Linda, poked her head in. Sir, she said, her voice nervous, we have the problem. Gerald turned to her, irritation flashing in his eyes. What now? Linda hesitated. The news crews are outside. Silence. Then Gerald turned back to Daniel, eyes burning with barely contained rage. You did this. Daniel allowed himself the faintest smile. You did this to yourself. Outside the HOA office, news cameras flashed, and reporters bombarded Daniel with questions. Agent Carter, is it true that the HOA demolished your home without cause? Do you believe this was intentional targeting? What charges are you pursuing? Daniel kept his answers measured but firm. This is a clear case of fraud and abuse of power, he said. Homeowners deserve protection from corrupt organizations, and I intend to make sure this never happens again. Behind him, Gerald Whitman tried to sneak out the back, but the moment a reporter spotted him, cameras swung in his direction. Mr. Whitman, do you have a response to the lawsuit? Did you authorize the demolition? Are you facing criminal charges? Gerald gritted his teeth, pushing past the reporters without a word. But the damage had been done. By the end of the day, Oak Ridge HOA was trending nationwide, and the real fight had only just begun. That night, Daniel received a call from Caleb. Carter, you're gonna love this, Caleb said. I dug into the HOA's financials. Turns out, they've been pocketing homeowner fines for years. And get this, there are off-the-record payments from a developer trying to buy out properties. Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. They're forcing people out. Exactly. They slap homeowners with fake violations, rack up enough fines to make them desperate, and then pressure them into selling. The buyer? A shell company linked to Whitman. Daniel's jaw clenched. That's organized fraud. I've already sent everything to Sarah, Caleb continued. You've got enough to bury these guys. Daniel exhaled slowly. Then let's make sure they never do this again. Daniel wasn't just going to fight back in court. He wanted to destroy the corrupt HOA from the inside. He reached out to homeowners, gathering their testimonies. Stories poured in of bogus citations, harassment, and threats. A widow was fined for a garden hose left out overnight. A veteran was forced to repaint his house 3 times over shade variations. Daniel had heard enough. He arranged for a public town hall meeting, televised, attended by state officials, and hosted at the Oak Ridge Community Center. When Gerald and his board members tried to stop it, the court issued a temporary injunction. The meeting was happening, whether they liked it or not. By the time it started, the place was packed. Homeowners, media, state investigators. And at the front, Daniel Carter, standing ready to take them down. The microphone crackled. The room buzzed with anticipation. Daniel stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady, tonight, we expose the real Oak Ridge HOA. He displayed financial records, testimonies, and hidden transactions. Every scam, lie, and abuse was laid bare. The audience gasped. People shouted in outrage. Gerald tried to interrupt, but the crowd wasn't having it. You stole from us, one man roared. You ruined lives, another woman cried. By the end, the HOA board resigned on the spot. And Gerald? He was escorted out by state investigators. The court officially dissolved the Oak Ridge HOA. Homeowners reclaimed their rights. The stolen money? Returned. Daniel had won. Gerald? He pleaded guilty to fraud and was sentenced to 10 years. The neighborhood thrived, free from tyranny. And Daniel? He sat on his porch, watching a sunset, knowing he had put things right. Months later, Caleb visited. So, what now? Daniel smirked. Hopefully, some peace and quiet. Caleb chuckled. Yeah, sure. Daniel raised his glass. For justice. Caleb clinked his glass against his. For justice. The fight was over. And this time, it was a victory for everyone.